And we'll start off with talk here from Jen Duthie. I've known Jen for a few years now. She originally was at the Center for Transportation Research here at the University of Texas at Austin, where we did a lot of interesting things, both with traffic flow simulated, as well as beginning to build what she called the data rodeo for all the different data and transportation entities here in the city to hopefully someday put all the data together and make for a more unified and more data-driven system. I think today Jen's going to talk a little bit about what the city of Austin is doing right now. She's moved on to sort of go actually implement a lot of these things with the city of Austin, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's going on there. So with that, Jen, you want to take over?
All right. Thank you, Niall. Yeah, in some ways, this is a catch-up. I don't think I've caught up with you since I've moved to the city. So like Niall mentioned, I moved over from a researcher position to working for the city of Austin just over 1 year ago. And as of last month, I'm the division manager for arterial management. So that's overseeing everything to do with traffic signals, signal maintenance, construction, signal timing, being kind of three of the main groups. And I invited John Clary to join us. He's the mastermind behind some of the data work that we've been doing. So he'll be listening and can correct me if I'm wrong, although I think he's at a conference, so I'm not sure whether he'll be able to speak up at all. So part of that is just a caveat that some of what I'll talk about today, it's only a small sampling of the stuff that we're doing in this space. And it definitely has a perspective coming from signal systems, because that's what I've been working on mostly. We have a ton of smart mobility efforts happening in Austin. We just hired an executive position in smart mobility. We just created at the department level a group that'll focus on data and IT. So a lot of this is really coming together for us. But it's all a work in progress. It's all baby steps and all the help we can get. So any thoughts you all have today are more than welcome, and maybe this will spur some collaborations moving forward. Okay, so again, signal system perspective, but this is what it looks like if I turn my computer around the other direction. We'd see our traffic management center or transportation management center, where we monitor traffic. And so a lot of my work at the city up until this point is trying to figure out how we can manage traffic more efficiently. And a lot of that comes down to knowing what's happening. So we have over 400 cameras around town, but we can only keep our eyes on so many at a time with just a handful of operators. And we have sensors, and it's a whole thing to get the data coming in, and then a whole other thing to be able to use the data. So this is a picture of the place we like to take people when they come. Yeah. So I want to talk about, I'll focus on two things today. One is the electronic tracking of assets and workflows, because that's an example of how we're moving toward, basically moving away from spreadsheets, moving away from somebody filling out a form by hand and having technicians dispatched electronically, tracking our assets electronically. And this has been, John's big effort, I guess, over the last year. Been highly successful, and that's part of the reason why we're moving some of these successes from the signals group to the department level. So I'll talk about this, and then I'll talk about some of our other data sources. So this is just a snapshot of our data and performance hub. This is public facing. To the extent that we can, we make data open or open by default. So you can go here. It's transportation.austintexas.io. I think I show the link in the next slide. And this changes and grows, every month, if not every day, where we add new categories or refine new categories, add new tools. Within data tracker here, we have a lot of our internal, just how we track data and track assets internally. And then most everything up here, and including the signal asset map, is going to be public facing so that people can see, just what we have. So even if it's not pretty, even if it's not useful, if we can make it open, we will. And then the public and our hacking community researchers can help us get from where it is to where it needs to be. You notice we have an open data inventory down here. So this links to a list of the data that we have available on the city's open data portal, data.austintexas.gov. And then we also have a GitHub page where we track the coding aspects. So John, I stole this from one of your slides. I hope that's okay. But this is a, just basically how the system works. So it has GIS components. It's linked to our open data portal. There's the open data and performance hub. And as I said, all of this is evolving and changing. But there's kind of two pieces to what John's created. There's the open data and performance hub, and then there's the data tracker. And we can talk about those systems in more detail. But the idea is that these systems are providing value to staff. And that's really been our focus, is just helping staff be more efficient. And that's, not necessarily the sexiest smart city application, but we find a lot of value in it. Just making our staff, having our staff spend less time processing paperwork and scanning and really being able to focus on the job they were hired to do. And then of course, like I mentioned, making the data available to the public and eventually getting to a place where we're making it available to them in a way that they find useful or that third parties can ingest and make useful. So just some idea of what we have in terms of assets that are generating data or not generating data. We have about 1,000 traffic signals, and most of those we have communication to, so we can we communicate with them in real time and know if they're operating as we expect them to, and if not, we can diagnose the problems. 63 pedestrian signals, over 400 traffic monitoring cameras that stream into our traffic management center. Travel sensors can be, most of those are either Bluetooth sensors where we can get travel times, or radar sensors for getting traffic counts. Those are great. I can't say that we're using that data a lot yet, but we have those things. Grid Smart is a type of vehicle detection where it's a fisheye camera where it helps our signal systems know how many vehicles are approaching each leg of the intersection and can adjust the signal timing accordingly. And Grid Smart, and there are other vendors out there, these systems can also give us data on turning movement counts and other things that are useful as we plan all sorts of transportation improvements. So just one example of one of the dashboards, we retime about 1/3 of our signals every year. And so this is a way for public, council members, leadership to look at, okay, what signals are we retiming this year? Our main performance metric for signal retiming is change in travel time. And we could have a whole other webinar just about that and why that's not a good performance metric. Maybe it was 30 years ago, but it's just not anymore. Just end-to-end on the corridor vehicle travel time. But anyway, that's our metric, and cities are kind of slow to change. So we'll work on changing that. But a lot of this type of information, whether it's signal timing or something else, used to live in a spreadsheet that was buried in a file server somewhere that only one person knew how to access or how to interpret. And we've been able to bring that out into the open, just making all sorts of efficiencies in terms of when somebody requests the data that here, it's just right here on the web. Okay. And then that's our data tracker and our dashboard. The next topic is some of the data that we have in real time and historical data. We have a relationship now with INRIX. There are a bunch of providers of travel time data. INRIX is one of them. There's a bunch of others. We ended up procuring INRIX. This is not their interface, actually. They have a very nice interface where it's very easy. I'm sitting in a meeting and somebody's talking about Fifth Street was a big topic the other day. We're talking about putting a transit only lane on Fifth Street, and I was able to just go in and in 30 seconds pull up what's the travel time on Fifth Street, how does that vary throughout the day, and just getting a sense of where are the congestion points. A lot of times I think we make decisions in transportation, probably many other fields, without a lot of just baseline data or performance metrics. So really trying to kind of shift our department to get there. So we're using this data to analyze the impact of our signal timing work. We're using it to look at the impacts of special events. We have a special event just about every day in Austin, it seems. So to know, okay, we made a timing change. Was that impactful? If we did something differently during South by Southwest this year than last year, there's rarely some kind of control reality before and after, or these kind of comparisons are difficult. But we found the data very useful to be able to look at how trends are changing over time and try to correlate that to certain causes. So this is just an example of showing some of the data that can come out of this type of source where we have number of trips, and we can show how that varies over different time periods, and then also travel time. And we have radar sensors around town, like I mentioned before. These are actual hardware that we have to install, whereas INRIX is just a purchase. For the hardware, we have to install these, we have to maintain these, and so I think that's part of the reason why we haven't had the success from installing sensors that we originally hoped, because it's just hard for that to be a priority for us when we have vehicle detection that stops working, or we have a big storm and our signal goes on flash, and our technicians are so busy that getting them to fix a broken Bluetooth detector just never rises to the top of that priority list. But the Wavetronics radar sensors that give us traffic counts and speed, we haven't found a great use case for in the traffic management center, but we're working with our traffic engineering group who does studies for new developments coming into town. Like a new Walmart is kind of a classic example, or any kind of new high-rise or residential building. They have to do a study of what would be the impact on traffic, and they need to know counts. And so they're very interested in us installing more of these around town, so we can just have a continuous baseline of counts. And the alternative being somebody going out on the roadway and either laying down tubes or manually collecting turning movement counts. So the manual travel data collection is still very much present in the transportation engineering field. Even for travel time, we still in some cases will have somebody go drive a corridor up and down. And that's not uncommon. That's not unique to Austin. So we're trying to figure out how we can move toward some of these other data sources that are a lot richer, but there's a trust issue there as well. Like if it's not a source where Google, we're going to start playing with Google travel time data soon. It's kind of a black box. They're like, here's the number, but not a lot of, I'm coming from an academic background, and so you want to know the algorithms behind it. You want to know exactly how it's done, and that's, it's just not always going to be the case. So there's some trade-offs there, but I think, the data is just so rich that as we establish that trust over time with these data sources, that we'll definitely be moving toward more third-party collection of data. Yeah, so again, kind of comparing different time periods, what are the counts or what are the speeds, and that can be very useful for us. Vehicle detection, I mentioned our GridSmart cameras. So we've been moving away from loops in the ground and moving toward aerial detection. So cameras in the air that detect vehicle movement. Loops are very high performing, except when there's construction, which happens all the time. A utility goes in and digs it up, and it's hard to, or we're not always quick to repair it. So we've been doing more of these video detection systems. So the GridSmart, one of the interesting things about them is we can get turning movement counts. We could potentially see trajectories and paths. So we're working with UT, Center for Transportation Research, and Texas Advanced Computing Center, and trying to figure out, okay, we're generating all this data. Now, what do we do with it? How do we store it? What do we store? We also have Texas Advanced Computing Center, one of Niall's colleagues, Weijia Zhu, working with us on alternative ways to get data from our traffic monitoring cameras. So these GridSmart systems are pretty expensive. They're about $18,000 a piece. Our normal traffic monitoring cameras are closer to $1,000. So if we can be pulling data just from our normal traffic monitoring cameras and getting counts or near misses from those, then we could potentially save a lot of money. So we've been working with Wasia, and we're also talking to several different vendors to the extent that we can use our existing equipment to pull in data that will help us. We definitely want to go that route. In terms of data storage, it seems like it should be an easier thing than it is. It's surprisingly difficult. I'm curious to hear about Boston, but for us to store data in the cloud, John, who's lurking on the call, has designed or architected a solution with Amazon Web Services, which is who the city works with. We're also looking at storing some data at TAC, Texas Advanced Computing Center. But it's an ongoing process, just trying to work with our security groups and everybody to figure out a solution that everyone is comfortable with. So I'm curious if you all have thoughts or know of some cities that are really innovating there. And since this was supposed to be a lightning talk, I'll stop there. But there's definitely plenty of other smart mobility pilots and data related topics. So I'm interested in any questions that you have and continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Jen. So any questions? Oh, we've got one from Mike here. So Mike Conway is asking, what's the landscape for the interoperability of the data? Can other municipalities freely exchange this data?
That's a great question. I mean, so what interoperability of the data, there aren't a lot of, and I might not be right. I mean, there's standards around some of the data where we're part of the Ways Connected Citizens program, something I didn't talk about. But we want to, where they gather lane closure information. So, we don't do a good job putting out where are lane closures happening or road closures. Some of those are planned special events. Some of those are unplanned, like a water main breaks. Or there's construction. We never know when construction's actually going to start, when it's actually going to end. And Ways has come up with a standard for that data that's quickly becoming the standard. So, we'll definitely share data in that standard. As far as sharing some of this other data with other cities, we're really trying to wrap our brains around even sharing it with ourselves, to be honest. But I think those are conversations that need to happen, especially if we want to be able to collaborate on things like video analytics. We're funding a project for someone to look at how do we use our CCTV cameras to extract data from. That's something that's interesting to probably every city in the country. So if there's some ways that we can be going about it that are standardized and cross municipality, we need to start having those conversations with our partner cities. So I don't have a good answer, but it's a good question.
So we've got several going on here in the Zoom chat. So MC Lang is asking, are you embracing transportation ontologies in the encoding of the data? Or is that a little more advanced than where you are, I guess?
I think so. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, just how you can, again, that's, I guess, more for the interoperability, is to make sure that people are using similar languages, vocabularies, and then the relationships between those. But I think, I know you guys are sort of still getting to the point where interoperability of even the same data is more, is difficult, much less trying to link other data.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge is just a lack of expertise on the city side, especially within transportation departments. So we were fortunate to have a staff member who is conversant in this and can help us build solutions. We're fortunate to have a partnership with a university that can help us. So despite my inability to answer some questions, I think we're actually pretty far ahead compared to some cities. Most cities don't have any expertise at all, and so they're very reliant on private sector vendor to come in and say, hey, I can do this for you. So for that reason,
they pay a lot of money and don't get anything out of it typically.
Well, a lot of things are happening in a black box and not, from a perspective of interoperability.
Right.
but it's something as an industry we need to think about if we want to move toward something like a more interoperable environment for sharing our data, then we need to figure out how to pool our expertise or, set up some kind of, it's probably just because we're in the beginning stages we move slowly, beginning stages of smart mobility and thinking about big data or data at all in transportation. So I think the conversation will get there, but if there are good examples of how that transition's occurred successfully in other industries to kind of building that expertise up, especially in the public sector, I'd be interested in learning about them. I think for now it's, we kind of do good things and then we try to tell other people about them and try to learn from others, like we're hoping to learn from Rachel today, and kind of gradually build up this community of people that are interested in this, and then we'll figure it out.
Sounds good. John, I'll hold on to your question, hopefully ask it of both people, but it's basically about the legal concerns and security concerns of sharing data. So that'll be coming up, but